yourself and the panel and the topic.
Okay, great. Thanks, Debbie. Well, hello, everyone. Again, my name is Allie Edelstein, and I am Senior Technical Advisor to the Talent Management and Leadership Development Team at the U.S. Commodity Futures Trading Commission. I know it's a mouthful. So I'll be referring to it as the CFTC for the rest of our time here together. I'll be moderating today's panel, and I'm especially thrilled to be here for today's topic because at the CFTC, you know, we are a small federal agency, and with that means we often have a fluctuating training budget or a non-existing training budget. So we often have to be very creative in how we get learning to our employees. And mobile learning is one of the ways that, you know, we're exploring to see if that'll be a fit for us. We at the CFTC, we're in the concept phase right now. We're working with our chief privacy team, the IT shop, and that has been a whole interesting journey in and of itself because we're laughing, Clarence. That's, you know, introduced all sorts of new hoops that we on the learning team didn't really dream up when we, you know, put together this whole concept for mobile learning. It's, you know, raised certain questions like, you know, who owns the mobile devices? Does the learning team? Does the IT team? Who's in charge of the policy? So, you know, stuff that necessarily wasn't on the forefront of our minds on the learning team. So, you know, I was hoping that we might be able to address some of those in today's discussion. Before we dive in, I just wanted to share a few statistics with you, and they should be on the handout here, but I think they're, you know, they really make the case for mobile learning here. According to Digital Government Institute, as of June 2013, 56% of American adults were smartphone owners. So more than half of Americans have smartphones. I thought that was a pretty interesting statistic. And that was as of last June, so who knows, you know, how much that has increased until to 2014. By 2015, more Americans will access the internet via mobile devices than desktop PCs. And mobile broadband subscriptions are expected to grow from nearly 1 billion in 2011 to over 5 billion globally in 2016. So I think those three stats really say a lot about how we are becoming more and more mobile as a society. So we should expect that our workforce is also going to become more and more mobile, which, you know, leans towards mobile learning. Our employees now, a lot of them are working remotely. Many of us telework. You know, people are working on the go. Especially in this area, everybody's working as they commute in, you know, maybe 2.5 hours on the way in, right, Joelle? So, you know, we're just a more and more mobile community and workforce, and I think our workforce expects training and learning to be at their fingertips as well. So, you know, I'll be excited to hear kind of the dialogue that comes out of today's session addressing the needs there. So, you know, one question to think about also is how do we as federal leaders help and embrace and encourage our teams to use mobile learning? How do we address the generation gap within our agencies, you know, in terms of using technology, and, you know, just how we're going to implement that. How do we work with IT? How do we work with the privacy teams, so on and so forth? So the big question is, how is government keeping up with mobile learning? And we're going to dive into that a little bit today. So with that, I'd like to introduce the panel. And I'll introduce you guys one at a time. If you could just give a brief overview of what you do in your role and what you're most excited about in terms of mobile learning, that would be great. So Brian, if we could start with you, if you could just kind of introduce yourself, talk a little bit about your role.
I'm Brian Crew. I am the Chief Learning Officer and the Associate Director for Human Capital Planning and Solutions at the Department of Transportation. So my responsibility is to make sure that all of the 60,000 employees, or just less than 60,000 employees, at the DOT learn and are competent to do their jobs. With that said, it's quite a challenge because we're dispersed across the government, and we have particular mission critical occupations safety inspectors who are not able to or not assigned to one location but are moving constantly, for instance, like our railroad inspectors. So we have to get them to be able to receive training and learning without being in an office, not being in a central location. So classes don't work for them. And quite frankly, our learning management system will not work for them in terms of delivering classes over that because they can't pull that, sit down for that length of time because they're using a mobile device. It's not going to pull a class for them for hours at a time. So it's a real challenge for us. And then we have air traffic controllers who are not allowed to use the computer virtually at all towards at any point in time except for maybe at the beginning of their shift and the end of their shift. So we need them to be able to get tidbits of information on the go when you're outside of that tower. So it's a real challenge for us.
Thanks, Brian. Next on the panel, we have Joellen Jarrett. Joellen, can you just, again, repeat your title and then talk a little bit about your role?
Sure. So my name is Joellen Jarrett. I'm the Director for Innovation and Performance Improvement in the Chief Human Capital Office of the Department of Energy. And basically let from the Office of Learning and Workforce Development. So it's a learning function. And my shop does everything from develop and push out competency modeling to the department so that we can do skills gap assessment analysis, to the metrics piece, making sure that we've got adequate systems in place to measure the degree to which our learning activities are working, how can we make them better, and then we also have a hand in the quality of the learning and the types of learning that we're pushing out, specifically, how can we better leverage mobile learning? So we are the early adopters, the socializers, and the implementers of new things. It's kind of fun when it works. But we do all of that with no money. So I haven't had a budget since I got there, so it's been interesting.
That certainly is a challenge, yes. Thank you. All right, Clarence, can you?
I'm again, the Deputy Director for the National Capital Region HR Center in the Department of Health and Human Services. We are one of about 10 or roughly 8 HR centers. We're decentralized, so all of our operating divisions, which is what we call our components, they have their own HR center. So the National Capital Region is responsible for the Office of the Secretary and 4 smaller operating divisions or components. Of course, being in HR, we're responsible for recruitment and staffing and bringing everybody on board. You can imagine the upheaval with the Affordable Care Act and the different type of skill sets that we have to bring on board. That's been very, very interesting. Why am I here? Because I used to be the Chief Learning Officer for HHSU, and I have an IT background as well. Okay, so I definitely have a perspective.
Very good. Thank you so much, Clarence. Okay, so before we open it up to everyone for questions, I do have a few questions myself, and I'm going to be using my mobile device. I thought it might be appropriate for today's session. So our first question, and I'm going to just open it up to the panel, so feel free to chime in, is how is mobility changing the learning environment at your agency?
So I think that it isn't that mobility is changing the learning environment. I think it's how is mobile technology changing how we address mobility, because we've always had mobility.
Right.
We just haven't had really good ways of training those folks. And with the newer technology, we have, I think, begun to dramatically improve the landscape of the learning environment for the folks who are mobile. And for the Department of Energy, that could be anything from our power marketing administration linemen who are out in the field and don't even know what a computer is, most of them, at least not on the job, to, you know, maybe our security force folks or our overseas folks, people who don't have access to classroom training, who don't have time for classroom training, or who simply need the just-in-time learning. That's how it's changing for us. We're better able to meet that customer base and their needs.
Yeah. Very good.
I probably would piggyback with what Joellen has said. We have not experienced mobility as a driver for changing the way we do our training so much as the availability of the technology is now allowing us to access more people. Whereas, you know, when I was at the Patent and Trademark Office, I would say that's the case where they're so mobile and there's so many teleworkers there. I think 80% of people are teleworking 80% of the time. That it's different, and it is driving them in the way they have to do training. In our case, the technology is now just allowing us to get to more people. The culture is such that the expectation is still you'll move to training as opposed to training moving to you. So what happens is we have a gap in training because people are not moving to training, especially since, as you know, way more people think that once they arrive at the job that they want to be at, that they don't have to learn anymore. We actually have to make it more convenient for them to get to training. So I'm finding that mobility is not really driving training so much as we need to make the training more mobile.
And I think if I were to add to that, it would also be, I think one of the drivers, I would agree, but I think another thing that's changing it is not necessarily the technology, but the people coming in who have those expectations that
Yes.
we will have Twitter, we will have the social media, etc. And so I see, I remember coming into the federal government in 2008 and being at certain agencies prior to that, from 2005 to 2007, at various agencies as a consultant to OPM, and I didn't see any of that, okay? Or you might have Facebook, okay? Well, now it's across the spectrum, okay? And that's not necessarily because of the people that were already in the federal government, but the people that are coming into those different generations that are coming into the federal government, and they're coming into the federal government with expectations that social media is going to be there. I will be able to access training from wherever I am. I don't have to sit in a classroom all day. I can do it from my desktop, I can do it from home, I can do it from my mobile device. So I think along with what my cohorts just added, I would also say the different generations that are coming into the federal government that is forcing that change.
Yeah, very good. Well, that kind of leads into the next question a little bit about since we have, kind of a new force of, generations coming into the workforce with certain expectations, what competencies are needed, to kind of meet the training needs from all three levels of, the learners aspect, the managers, and then kind of like the structural piece, or even just like the learning team.
So I think right off of that, the first thing that comes to my mind is flexibility, which is interesting because it's an ECQ, as you know. So you really need to be able to address all the levels of the generations within the organization, and to offer training, you have to be very flexible, because as soon as there's leaders who will say, I want to have classroom training because that's what they're used to. Then you have Generation Y, or the millennials, who want it at that time on their mobile device. And then you have Gen X, who's in between. And so how do you get that same curriculum, that same information out to everybody? And one of the things that I found me and my staff like to do is we put a solution out there, and we want it to be the solution for everybody. And yet that's not going to work, so we have to be flexible in making sure that we're addressing all the customers' needs in our entire audience. Not always fun, because there's a million things to do. Joellen said they have no budget. We have a little budget, but very few people. So there's not a lot of capacity to keep taking on projects and customize things to the audience. So you need to be very flexible, I would say that's the first thing. And then I bet you Joellen will agree with this one too. You also have to be very financially savvy. So that's another competency I would say, because you have to learn to stretch your dollar. One of the things that I've been very pleased with what we've done at DOT is we partner very well with other agencies, internally as well as externally across the government, to try to not have to rebuild a wheel. So we'll say, well, this is what we need, or what are your needs? Do you have your needs assessment? This is what we're trying to build. How can we build it so it will serve multiple groups' needs, and can you do the same thing for us so we can stretch that dollar? So it's a collaboration piece as well in there. So those are probably the biggest competencies I would see in terms of trying to address these needs.
Yeah. And Brian, let me just clarify one point you were making. It sounded like you were going for different types of learning methodologies to kind of meet the different levels. So for the same course, are you doing that?
So in some cases, yes. It's usually it's not the same course, but the same competencies that are addressed. So the same learning objectives. So the course might be slightly different, but the curriculum is overlapping. But it's challenging, and even with the baby boomers, they don't understand why we're doing it more than once. You checked my box. Why aren't you doing that anymore? So
So there's an education piece.
There's an education piece as well. They definitely recognize the competency gap that's existing in, say, Generation Y or the Generation X in terms of taking over next. And so you have to sell it at that point. So there's that salesmanship as well, or influence and persuasion as well, when you're trying to explain why the mobile and the at-that-time learning is necessary.
Yeah, yeah. Would you both agree, or Joellen, you have a...
When Brian said financially savvy, I wrote it and I wrote dollar signs. I think part of that is being very strategic in, as we're deciding what strategy we're going to use, making sure that we appropriately track the metrics behind that. Because to Brian's point, there are a lot of questions. Well, why can't we just roll e-performance out to everybody? Well, because not everybody's going to get it. Well, that's the solution. We're going to train everybody with e-performance. They're going to take their performance management training online. And what do you mean they haven't done their performance plans? They didn't get it. They didn't understand. That's not going to work for everybody. We may have to have some classroom training. We may have to have some individual coaching. The only way to really drive that point is by starting up front with the metrics and making sure that you're tracking what's going on, and you're really painting the picture for those stakeholders in terms of the population and why you're selecting a particular methodology and what the outcome is.
Yeah. Okay.
I would agree with that. I would add to the whole analytics part. As training professionals, when we're talking about learning professionals, we don't do a very good job in analytics, measuring, okay? And we have to do that. So example, if you were to take your classroom and you were to measure it by how many days in a calendar year that we come to work, which is about 260, how often is that training room used? Okay, how often, and what's the capacity of that training room? If you have 20 seats, how many seats are you actually using? Instead of the butts and seats, well, this is how many people we train, you will get the utilization rate of that training room. Okay, do you really need it now? Okay, or can you do something else? So putting analytics in place that can really drive the business and have people see exactly what's efficient and what's not efficient. And if it's not efficient, then we do away with it and we do something else. I know at HHS we actually shut down about 5 training rooms, okay, because we were only utilizing them one 31% of the time, another one 8% of the time. We shut them down, okay? And we moved quite a bit to online learning, okay? And any vendor type training, we push back on the operating divisions to be responsible for that. So really looking at analytics, and I would also add relationship building. When you don't have a budget or you have very little budget, you have to develop relationships somewhere in order to get those things done. And I know that there's plenty of colleges with interns out there that's willing to come in and to be very, very innovative. And I'll give you an example. At the Virginia Department of Social Services, I had one staff member which was a contractor. Everything was basically contracted out to one of the universities, Virginia. I apologize, but it's one of the universities right in Richmond, and so we would give $1 million. They would match it with $1 million, and then we would ask the federal government through Title 4E program another $3 million to get social services training throughout the state. That's how I did it. So developing those relationships, whether it's government, state, university, developing those relationships that can help you accomplish your mission. And I would also like to add, as you peruse across the web and you look on different websites and OPM, we see competencies for the workers, but there's very few competencies for the managers. And these are the people that are in charge. There's a certain generation of people that are in charge that our young people coming in keep hitting a ceiling. And so one of the pushes that we have is, how do we get those same competencies to our managers, to the ones that are ingrained and they're there and they're in the decision making? How do we open them up, okay, to making those correct decisions and seeing things from a technology level, a human capital level, and marrying them together? What do we need to do to train them and attain their competencies there? So.
Yeah, well, that's a really interesting point, and I think that you must have had to do some of that within the internal relationship building if you shut down 5 training centers and moved to a lot of the training to online. I mean, that's a pretty big cultural learning shift. I'm assuming you also went to some mobile activities as well.
Absolutely.
So, what was the result of that? Did you lose, the engagement of some leaders, or were you able to work the relationship piece enough?
No, HHS University, again, is responsible for, they're responsible for the mobile learning throughout the agency, okay, throughout. And of course, the way your learning platforms are built, you can have as many domains as you want throughout the different, throughout your components. So that wasn't necessarily a problem. Everybody loves that. But when it came to classroom stand-up training, okay, there's a certain generation of people, right? I said baby boomers. I'm at the tail of the boomers, okay? They want that classroom training, okay? And so what we did was we pushed that back on the different components, okay? If that's what you want to do, then it's okay, but they absorb that cost. And so what you start seeing is more people moving to mobile learning. Okay, it's still there, but more people move to mobile learning.
Very interesting. Thank you for sharing that story. Have either of you had a similar, experience with moving from in-house to online and mobile?
So I did a little prep work because I thought this might come up. Energy has an interesting demographic. The average age is 48.9, so almost 49.
47.
Yeah, and even if you combine them, the group of individuals 29 and younger doesn't even hit 5%.
Wow.
So we really, that millennial generation, and I have one at home, I know what it looks like. I have a millennial and a Gen Y. I like the millennial better. Don't tell the Gen Y. But the millennial, I've watched her. It's amazing to watch how they learn. that small component of millennials that we have at Energy, they do well, even though we haven't moved in that direction as much. And we are starting to, but to Clarence's point, the rest of the population, just a quick number, 40 and above is probably 50% of our population. So Gen X and boomers, and they like their classroom training. So it's a slow move. It's a slow move. What we have been hugely successful on is getting folks to adopt things like Adobe Connect, and we started small. We kind of snuck it in. We snuck it in as a facilitation tool. We snuck it in as a meeting tool because nobody has any money. So, you know, sometimes lack of money is a good thing because it promotes innovation. People didn't have money for travel dollars, and there were cries and there was gnashing of teeth because we needed to meet. You had to collaborate, and so we said, well, we've got a great tool. We got a great tool. We can use this tool. We can bring folks together, and I think we saved $500,000 like the first year that we implemented, which was nice. We avoided the cost of $500,000. And then we said, well, you know, we could use it to push training out too. We could do facilitated learning via Adobe Connect. And we are now actively pursuing this continual learning initiative using Adobe Connect to facilitate some just-in-time learning. They're really small. They're snippets. They're like lunch and learns. But getting folks engaged, because engagement was one of the things on the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey. You know, it's a pain point. So really pushing the idea of engagement, employee engagement, getting supervisors smart on how do you engage your workforce around learning and development and these different topics. And it's working. It's working.
That's a great little nugget to share.
Right. In my instance, I'm not sure it's working for us yet. I'm not sure we're there yet. To be quite honest with you, I don't want to sell you a bill of goods here and say that this is the best thing ever. Like I said, I'm not sure we have rolled it out in an ideal way. One of the things that we are leaning toward is putting things onto the TMS that are available. That's what we use, TMS, which is through IBC, our learning management system. And you can connect through your phone to some of those applications. We are also using Adobe Connect, and it's sparingly. What I'm noticing just from hearing from people when I do our focus groups is that people don't like it as much as we thought they would, and that's even some of the younger people. They're used to that as younger people, but they also have a longing to connect to people, and they don't feel connected to people. And when we go to try to do it so they can see other people, you know, through the system and get a face-to-face, our IT people tell us the system can't handle that. That's too much bandwidth. That's not acceptable. You're using too much. So we're not ready for some of that. And I think one of the things that when we start going, you know, we start considering assessing mobile people, we have to realize is maybe our systems aren't ready to do the learning yet that way, and in a way that's going to impact learning over the lifetime. So you go to a class and you take the learning back. What you also take back is somebody else in that classroom who learned with you. So if y'all didn't understand something very well and they seem to learn it pretty well, you took that person with you back as well at that new contact. When you're going online and you're picking that up, or you're getting on your phone and picking that up, if you're not connecting with another person, who's going to facilitate that learning after the class is over, after you gone through that segment? So that's the piece I want to do a little bit more research on before I'm not feel comfortable saying, oh yeah, it's working. I'm not sure it is going to work as well over the long haul unless we do the back end to facilitate the back end work to facilitate those connections and those contacts, because you build a cohort when you go to class. So where's that cohort over that mobile device? And I know we're not doing it so well at DOT yet, from my understanding. I'm not certain other people haven't already solved that.
And I have to say, I'm sorry, Clarence.
No, go right ahead.
The measurement piece is tough, and we are still working on the measurement piece. So when I say it's working, I mean it's working from the standpoint of people using it and engaging. The jury is still out in terms of the hard data, the analytics, to Clarence's point. We're working on it. We're trying to gather the data. That's another one of those competencies, knowing what to ask, because it's not the same. There are different questions that need to be considered.
Right.
Viola mentioned about Adobe Connect. It took us 3 years from the first time on the very first presentation for Adobe Connect was made, and it took us 3 years to sort of implement it, and we really started it in the Office of the Secretary, and we started it for meetings. Okay, so here's where the analytics come in. So one of my teams was responsible for new employee orientation. So I asked the question, how much is it costing us? How much does new employee orientation cost us? So we went out, we found, you know, a good measurement, and you know, it's a great book. I apologize, I don't remember the author, but it's How to Measure HR. That's the title of it, How to Measure HR. And it is a fantastic resource. And if anybody is interested, I can get the author. But it has all the HR measurements that you could ever want in there. You can also find some of this stuff on the web. But minus materials, we spend approximately $300 per employee. Okay, so if we spend $300 per employee, how do we drive that cost down? Okay, because one of the objectives should be driving the cost down, but keeping the quality relatively the same or higher. All right, and so we did that through Adobe Connect. So one of the we were completely missing out on new employee orientation for people in our regions, and we have 10, all right, at HHS across the country, and they weren't getting it. They were not getting it. We instituted Adobe Connect. We set up different time frames, documents, the PowerPoint slides, everything, and even reaching the people in California. So now the people in California, we swear them in online, and it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. The goal, though, is to maybe do new employee orientation before they come on board.
It's illegal at first.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me, this is Angela Kravitz, and I'm one of those that are very passionate about this particular subject, and I appreciate the candidness that Brian and Joella and Clarence have provided. But I've got 3 questions, somewhat very, very similar, and probably can get a short answer. But I'm that aging boomer where classroom is probably a preference because I like that interaction with adults and so forth. But for now, as technology is taking over the world, is there a current list of training that is currently being offered? Number 2, is there a current list of agencies that are currently partnering? And then what is the applicability of this mobile training, and how is it return on the investment with regards to employee engagement, employee performance? So those are my kind of 3.5 questions.
Thank you so much. Those are a great 3.5 questions.
Good.
Would you guys like to address that? Oh, for the list of what kind of training? Could you clarify what you're interested in, what kind of training? For, you know.
Well, specifically what I'm looking at is not necessarily the new employee orientation, but what I'm looking for is much more of a robust training development, especially for the SES community. A majority of our folks do rely heavily on fulfilling and enhancing their ECQs and so forth. And so flexibility and collaboration and relationship building, those are the kinds of meatier courses that I was kind of looking for with regards to a list of training that is currently being offered via mobile.
Very good. Thank you for clarifying. So,
Sure.
Yeah.
So this is Brian. I'm unaware of a list like that, and I probably would not lean toward a list for that like that for my SESers because they don't like that type of training, and if they don't like it and they have a reluctance to it, they're not going to do it. It's tough enough for me to persuade them to go to training at all because they've already arrived, so to speak. And so it needs to be, usually when they're trying to find out how to learn, trying to learn something new, it's very specific and very targeted, and it's not like strategic planning. It's like, how do I mitigate threats, or how do I leverage strengths within strategic planning, because they are very targeted because they feel like they know enough. They don't want to waste their time on things they already know. It may not be true, but that's the mindset that is out there. So I don't know of a list like that that exists.
Okay, thanks, Brian. What about Joella, or what about Clarence?
Hi, Angela. This is Joellen. So the lists. I don't know of a list per se, unless perhaps the Office of Personnel Management may have some type of a resource listing, or you may want to peruse the Eastern Management Center or one of the Management Center sites and see what they have. With regard to ROI on employee engagement, that's funny you should say that. I was just sat in a meeting. Just sat in a meeting yesterday on employee engagement, and all of the reasons why it's important and why we have no idea what actually equates to metrics around it.
You mean at DOE?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, Brian, at DOE. Well, so the point being that so much of our energy gets funneled into the results of the Federal Employee Viewpoint Service survey, and we really do all interpret, I think, those numbers somewhat differently. So, you know, we were talking about employee engagement. I will say this, from a mobile learning perspective, we have what I consider to be a very robust executive learning series at the Department of Energy. And the gentleman who runs that program is David Rosenmarkel. Are you familiar with Mr. Rosenmarkel?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, and that was what I was alluding to, and so maybe I don't know if the membership of ACT IAC has seen this, but Dave Rosenmarkel sends out messages with regards to various 1 hour, 3 hour sessions of topics that are provided by SES leaders. So that's the kind of training, that's the kind of lunch and learns, that's the kind of that collaboration that I was trying to seek and get more out of, other than DOE, because y'all or Department of Energy really did well with that one and so forth. So just curious if there was anybody else on the phone, on the bridge, that would have a list of really energized courses or lunch and learn sessions that the SES community can tap into.
Before we jump to other people on the phone, I did want to just let Clarence have an opportunity to answer your question.
Sure.
I don't think there's anything else I can say on the topic. Brian and Joellen has said the same thing that I was about to say. I know that there's resources out there, but I don't know of any resource where it's collected and you can just at a glance look at what's exactly needed.
Yeah, that's what I was looking for. If there was some sort of one-stop shopping center, a collection box that would have these kinds of sessions that we could all tap into. That's partnership, collaboration, relationship building.
I think you might follow up with Joellen's suggestion about OPM, though. I know they have the HRU, and then they have another mobile setup university where I know they're collecting, and they are working with the CLO Council to capture all of the learning, and they will actually chunk it. And so if it's SES or ECT related, that will be on their site. If not immediately, pretty shortly after that, because what we do as a CLOs is we let them OPM know pretty soon, and they get it onto their site.
And I want to just close out the comment about the Executive Learning Series to make sure that the folks in the room understand that on the face of it, it is not a mobile learning activity. We bring in authors and guest speakers from various walks of life, lots of different subjects, to come in and speak on selected topics, 1 hour, 1.5 hours, 2 hours, to our executive core, and we invite all federal executives. So, and actually I think it's 14s and above are invited to participate, and they also stream it via telephone. So folks are able to call in. Okay. What we have done to kind of mobilize this activity, if that's a word, is those sessions are recorded, and we've worked with our IT folks and a couple of wonderful college students, Clarence, who figured out how to chuck it down far enough so that we could, or small enough, so that we could actually post it on our DOE Virtual University. Okay, so, but that is behind our firewall, and the reason being, exactly what you brought up earlier when we first started, the legality issue and the sensitivity around intellectual property law and things like that. So we have to get approval from each speaker beforehand and let them know that, hey, we'd really like to record this for posterity and make it available to our workforce at large. Sometimes that doesn't happen, sometimes it does.
Yeah, very good. I think that's a great segue into the next question I had. I have just a few more, and then I'll open it up to the folks in the room and the folks on the phone. And we've been alluding to this a little bit throughout our dialogue this morning, but what are the biggest challenges facing the CLO community in adopting mobility? And, through your trials and tribulations, what have you learned? What advice could you offer? Any vision for a couple of years down the road, where you would like to be?
2 years ago, where I wanted to be right now is where everybody could pull up just-in-time training on their mobile devices. And the biggest challenge for doing that is our current people who do the training and development as well as the IT side of that house that support them. They don't know how to do this because that's not the skills that they were trained on. This is all new and rapidly growing technology. And so what our IT people are right now, quite frankly, are project managers. And then the skill sets are contractors. Well, when money's being cut by Congress, you can't get those contractors. So you can't do that work. So you got a bunch of project managers who can manage projects that you don't have. And that's just the case for us, seriously. With that said, that's a huge challenge, as well as the mindset that the people who design these trainings for us for a long term, they're used to developing beautiful classes. And it's a switch for them. So that change is a big switch for the instructional designers as well. And then I guess there's this other piece that I did not know about until I got to DOT and became in charge of diversity as well. There is a 508 compliance that becomes a problem for us. So instructional designers and even IT people, they don't always get that it has to be 508 compliant. So I have this beautiful class that I can put, or learning that I can put onto the system and push out to everybody wherever they are, except you can't because it wasn't done in a 508 compliant manner. And so therefore, you got to hold that thing for 5 months until that's all ready. And so 508 compliance, when we talked earlier about competencies that people need to know, they need to know how to develop things in a 508 compliant manner. And unfortunately, the government is not, and government and private industry are not all on the same page in terms of what that is. If you go to this agency, it's one thing. If you go to the next agency, it's something different. So those are the challenges that I think we're facing because classroom is so much easier because no one can see it. That's not 508 compliant. But once it hits, you're posting it anywhere electronically, it becomes that 508 compliance rule. And we don't have personnel who know it intrinsically, and then we have a person who does it and does it for everybody in the whole department, and then that's an ancillary duty. So it discourages us sometimes from doing the mobile stuff and the electronic stuff the way we want to. It's just, that is a challenge. Doesn't mean we're not going to overcome it, it just means we're not quite where we want to be yet. And so strategically, how can we position ourselves so that we start hiring people who are prepared to deal with these challenges? And how can I train the current people to deal with those challenges?
Yeah, that's very good. Thanks for sharing. So it sounds like you have the vision, but you might not have the infrastructure necessarily to support the execution of it. Joellen?
I was going to punch. I was going to let Clarence go.
Okay.
That's fine.
Okay, I have an answer.
I'm back cleanup.
Okay. Okay. I think for us it's very broad, and so I think that we have the infrastructure, but let's just take learners. So for the learning community, having a business acumen, okay, and that means analytics. That means business, measuring everything that you do so you can make business decisions, not based on somebody coming to you and say, hey, I need this course. Okay, well, sit down with them. Why do you need this course? What problem are you trying to solve? It may not be a learning problem. It may not be a learning issue. It may just be a performance issue. So looking at learning as performance, okay? Performance in around the business. So I'll just give you a couple of, when I was in the private sector, as a training department or a learning division, I had the help desk. Okay, I had the help desk, and we would do analytics to find out what was the biggest cause on the help desk, and then we developed some training around it, or job aids, or whatever the case may be, until those numbers went down, and then we went to the next one. Okay, all around performance. So in the learning community, having a business acumen, in the IT community, okay, having IT understand the business of learning. Okay, the most right now, currently, the most valuable person in your division is the people that can talk to IT. They're valuable. Okay, and so having IT understand that, and then last but not least is the HR community, because they're the ones bringing the people on. Brian talked about instructional designers. In 1995, I brought on at Intermountain Healthcare. I was bringing on instructional technologists. All right. In 2009, when I was recruiting in the federal government for an instructional technologist, my HR specialist didn't know what I was talking about. Okay. And so here we are 10 years later, and they didn't know. So having HR, because that's the only way that it's going to work, to have HR, IT, and learning work together, okay, in order to move forward with this, with where we need to go, mobility, the different type of skill sets, the different type of competencies, okay. And I think I would add, if you're bringing in new technology, if you want to do anything different, there needs to be a real thought around who it's going to affect and bring those people to the table. Okay, I think we get afraid sometimes that, oh, the crowd is too big. Okay, we don't have enough people. It's put in the work up front. Okay, and you won't, it's just smooth sailing on the back end. But put the work in up front to make sure that you're meeting the majority of people's needs. Okay.
Can I say one thing I forgot to say?
Yes.
So I really think one of the biggest challenges is actually learning to collaborate. So, like a lot of the challenges I mentioned, like lack of infrastructure and that type of thing, lack of funding that we talked about, lack of personnel. Learning to collaborate outside of your own control, your span of control, is probably one of the biggest challenges. People don't want to do it. People like to make their own decisions. They don't want to compromise. They want to be in charge. And the federal government is not set up well in some places to do your own thing well. Exactly. And we're rewarded on our individual success. But if we look at a different way of doing that, and we start working across outside of our own boundaries and spanning boundaries, I just think we'd be so much more successful if I said, oh, you already did that. What if we do our contract together and we pay for this one course? Or what if we do our contract together and we get a better platform? So I think that's the biggest challenge, is actually teaching us, the CLOs, who are trying to do a lot better, and the training directors and the managers and leaders who, as you all know, do a lot of learning outside of even talking to the HR department. Say, I got a really big budget, I'm going to go do a contract, and then we're going to talk to us about it. If we can get that group to collaborate together, then we can solve our biggest challenge, which is, for me, some of this infrastructure things.
I think that really speaks to kind of what we were talking earlier around the building relationships competency, and how huge that is to having this big success.
It's huge.
Absolutely.
You know, I think aside from the collaboration, which is huge, the same thing that's brought us here today to talk about, mobile learning, the technology, it's as much a great thing as it is a challenge for us. Even just within our own organization, from one program office to another, I can't stream, I can't push something, somebody can't pick up their smartphone and access DOE Virtual University because they have firewall issues. Which isn't inherently an HR problem, it's an IT problem.
Right.
And they don't really care about HR's problem. It's a security issue. And security is important. So, recently I experienced an organization where you asked who would own these devices. Would we own the devices? Would the organizations own the devices? Well, in this particular organization, I showed up for class and it was like, yeah, bring your own device. We all brought our own devices. And over the 14 weeks that I was at National Defense University, I used my laptop, I used my smartphone, and I used my iPad. And some days I used all three, depending on if the class was boring or not, 'cause the phone you can hold down here and just kind of, search.
I would like to hear that as
No. Fortunately, I didn't have very many boring classes. But the point being, they are, I think, really on the forefront of exploring this whole idea. And there may be other federal agencies out there that I'm not aware of, but this was truly my first experience of an organization that's like, yeah, bring your own device. And, we have some paperwork for you to fill out. And it was a very refreshing experience to have that control. Now, they issued us all Kindles as well, so there was kind of a blended approach there. I don't know of anyone in class who actually used their Kindle because they issued us old Kindles that nobody really wants. So we all just downloaded everything onto our own iPads or smartphones or laptops and, continued on. But again, the biggest challenge there was still, in to some degree, the technology. Getting past the versions of, you have an outdated version of whatever.
Right.
I don't know of any federal agency that the employee has the ability to just push a button and update their Windows or update their Explorer.
Right.
So if you're trying to get to Coursera or to some other MOOC, if you have an outdated version of a browser, Coursera is not going to launch. And Coursera is probably one of the main ways that my staff got training over the last year and a half.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't afford to send them class. So then it's like, okay, what else do we do? IT was our best friend and our worst enemy, Brian.
Yep.
That's very good.
I think to add on to what Joellen is saying, one of the things that I'm noticing with your millennials and your Generation Zs that are coming in is they can multitask. They're used to multitasking. And they can be sitting in a training room, which is going to bore them to death, but be on their mobile device as well, checking emails, et cetera, et cetera. And in the learning community, you see it all the time. It kills a trainer to do that. Most trainers are a lot better at it than maybe 10 years ago. They don't come in and tell you to turn stuff off now, okay? But we had you're going to love this. We had an emerging leader program last year that they graduated, and they invited one of the former graduates to come back and be the guest speaker. So these are 20-year-olds talking to 20-year-olds, or 20-plus-year-olds talking to 20-plus-year-olds. And, of course, everybody running the program are 40s, 50s, all right, et cetera. And so we're sitting back as mentors, and the guy was very, very sharp. But he did something I had never seen before. And normally what happens when you're sitting in a crowd of people, if you have mobile devices, can you please turn them down? Can you please turn them off? Turn them on silent, et cetera. This guy stood up, introduced himself, et cetera, and he says, if you got iPads, if you have mobile devices, if you have an iPhone, you may want to keep them on because you may want to get this. And all of a sudden you saw them coming up. And we looked at each other and went, that's pretty cool, okay? And now, not only do they have it recorded, but they can share it with their friends, they have it for prosperity, et cetera, okay? And we actually had it on an Adobe Connect session as well, but yet and still we have people that want to take minutes and send the minutes out, okay? And so when we're talking about, you know, this whole mobility and mobile training and mobile devices, we do have to understand that your Generation Zs and millennials, they can multitask. They can be doing something and listening to something else. That's how they grew up. I have a 10 and 7-year-old. I have a 24 and 19-year-old. All right, and I have a 10 and 7-year-old, and the difference is unbelievable. My 24 and 19-year-old, they grew up with the cell phone and computers. All right, but my 10 and 7-year-old, when I see them, they say, Dad, when we're in the car, we're about to leave, they say, Dad, can you bring your hotspot, please? Okay, so I'm in the car, I'm in with the hotspot, and they are playing their games, they're accessing the internet, etc., and we're driving down 95. Now, what does that mean? That means that in 10 years, my son, my 10-year-old, will be ready for the workforce. Hopefully, he doesn't come back in this boomerang effect. But that's what I'm.
Clarence, they always come back.
That's what I'm hoping for. But he'll be ready for the workplace. Unlike the millennials who expect to access information, he and my 7-year-old will want to access information wherever they are. That's different. Wherever they are, they want to access information and they want it right now. Okay? And so I'm looking, and it's really blowing me away because they'll be at home, television going, both of them on different programs on their iPad, music going. And I say, hey, you got to turn something off, man. This is driving me crazy. All right? But they're multitasking, and it's okay. And he can hold all three conversations.
Thank you, Clarence. I think that's a good window into kind of what's to come. At this point, I want to be mindful of our time. I do want to open the panel up to questions from the audience in the room and on the phone. So if anybody has a question, please feel free to chime in. Gary, yes.
I guess two things. I guess first as a comment in terms of, I guess relating to the last question, the biggest challenges. One, louder. One of the things I would recommend is kind of taking a minimalist approach that is not really thinking that mobile learning has to be just a course on your phone. Present concepts, present summaries from reactivation knowledge from more traditional learning opportunities. So if it was a traditional class, for instance, that you can send out ideas and concepts and reminders through mobile, and so that can help mitigate some of the challenges that don't start off with thinking that, okay, I need to basically take my course and put it on a 5-inch screen. And the second thing I want to is a question. In terms of what it is that you are doing as far as M-Learning, could you speak to the content that you are presenting through mobile learning and also the context through which your learners are engaging with? So content and context.
Very good. Okay. Okay, I'll take this one first. Okay, content and context. A couple of different things. So I spoke to the Continual Learning Initiative. The content there is very simply, it's about, it's just-in-time learning for both employees and managers around workforce development, individual development, giving them ideas about how I can continue to learn and grow in a budget-constrained environment that's not just classroom training. There's a lot of demonstration in that mobile learning, so at any given time the instructor may pop out to a website to show them what's a MOOC, you know, Coursera, those types of things, They may demo for them. How do I actually create a plan? Those types of things. That's the continual learning initiative. One of the other big things that we've been pushing out through mobile learning is something around the whole weatherization and energy efficiency arena, and that's through the National Training and Education Resource, which was built by one of our program offices, not by us. I can't take credit for it at all, but it's largely much more than an LMS because it has a lot more flexibility, and it enabled them to push out some virtual, I want to say gaming, but 3D types of instruction to actually teach folks in the field, how do I install insulation? How do I go in and complete a weatherization check of a home or a structure? And so there's a lot of 3D imaging and whatnot that goes on in that particular content. And it's chunked so that instructors can take pieces, parts from different courses and create new content relatively quickly and effectively and efficiently without a whole lot of cost. Those are the two big ones, other than the simple stuff, like I said, taking what is traditionally not mobile, the executive learning, and recording it and packaging it and placing it somewhere where folks can get to it through, other devices. Does that answer? Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
Did either of you gentlemen want to add?
I'd say the same thing. We do a lot of recordings and packaging them and putting them in places and putting them down on the devices. We also send out a lot of job based. To your point, everything that doesn't have to be a classroom that you're trying to turn to a 5-inch screen or even a 3-inch screen in my case. We definitely put a lot of job aids out, specifically when we change a process or when we change a tool. We'll put a lot of job aids out that people can pull up on the fly. We even do it for other agencies, offerings that we don't own. So like a lot of our NBC, we use NBC as our provider for a lot of things. We'll put tools out there on the internet so that people can pull them off and quickly figure out how to manage the change. So we're doing a lot of tools more so I would say that's where our biggest success is in terms of the mobile learning. So they know where to go to get something and pull it off really quickly so that it doesn't take a lot of bandwidth because phones are a lot slower than say a computer connection.
I actually like your question. We do the same thing. We do some other things where you got to remember the way HHS is set up. We have the Office of the Secretary and OHR is under the Office of the Secretary. So any type of job, skills, training is left up to the operating divisions, I apologize, to train their people on. We look at the more global stuff that's going to affect the whole agency. So of course, in 2008 it was a little bit different when I came into the federal government, so now I'm seeing stuff on YouTube. Okay, we actually have new we have mandatory training. I know I keep going back to NEO, but I'm in HR now, right? But we have all mandatory training for NEO on YouTube. That's how people get trained, okay, in the regions and that type of stuff, okay? We have Adobe Connect. We have communities of practice, okay? This is across the enterprise. Most of your learning management systems or human capital systems, they have communities in them where you can actually sign up and actually have a password log on for it, and if you sign up to that community, you get in that community, and only the people sign up to the community can get in the community. So so we have communities. We also have Twitter, et cetera, et cetera. I have Twitter, and I keep getting these pop-ups, people wanting to talk, and I don't have that kind of time. Okay? But you're right. The real question is exactly what is learning, and if we define that, then and we have an accurate definition of that, then we can have an accurate definition of how we deliver it, whether it's through job aids, whether it's putting stuff up on the web, whether it's delivering content in certain fashions, et cetera. So there's a variety of things that we do.
Thank you. Thanks, Gary. Great question. Debbie?
I just wanted to, Joellen, you were talking about one of the things you do is you bring in subject matter experts that will talk for an hour or two, and you record that. I neglected to say this up front, but for anyone on the phone, we are recording this session.
Right.
And we will be putting a link up on the ACT-IAC site under the Human Capital. So for anyone who wasn't able to attend today, or if you have any peers or people in your organizations that you'd like to, revisit this, you can take out your smartphone, go to the ACT-IAC set, and view this session on your smartphone.
Thank you.
Very good. I'm happy to hear that we will be available locally. Mobile technology.
I thought it was just went with the topic.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Hi, Joan Golden from Topside. My question is for the three of you. What is the current mobile technology that your IT offices are provisioning employees with right now? I mean, what's the state of that in terms of, I know we talk about BYOD and you talked about the Kindle being issued that was like, nobody's going to use it. But what, if you're looking at the platform that's available, being issued by your agency, what would that be right now?
I know a few things are being piloted, and I can speak to what I know. I would not say this is an all-inclusive list, because like Clarence, I'm at, and as well as Joel, we're at the Office of the Secretary, and so we have several operating administrations below us. That's what we call our subdivisions, and they also we tend to at the Office of the Secretary give them a large purview, and we'll say this is suggested, but they will pick other things as well. So I can't tell you definitively everything there, but I know we have a pilot for iPhones as well as iPads, and then we have Blackberries. So those are the three things that we use across the department.
Same here. Blackberries, cell phones, iPhones, iPads. Our environment too is decentralized, and the problem being it's not across the board. These devices don't typically get issued to every employee. It's typically to the senior staff. So you have to keep that in mind if you're trying to push out mobile learning. It needs to be outside of the firewall.
Which is why we also are trying to bring your own device.
It's the same. We have all the social networks now. So we have all the social media. And again, the senior level people get Blackberries. I only use my Blackberry for work. I do nothing else on my Blackberry. In answering emails, I actually have a Samsung Note 3, and I use that for everything, even to get into email if I need to. So.
Thank you.
Okay.
Real quick, do you have any opinions for the three of you on user-generated content? Because I feel one of the great advantages that you can leverage in terms of a mobile device is having your users be able to generate and share content. And I know there was conversations before about the older generations missing the social elements of a classroom, and how we can leverage the experiences and knowledge of our workforce, and how this ubiquitous device that we have with us all the time can be used to capture and share the knowledge amongst the workers, and not necessarily feel that us as L&D professionals, that our shops are going to be the only source of knowledge. So what are your thoughts on that, and are you doing it?
We're doing it at HHS. We have a Learning Advisory Council that's representative of of all the agencies, and content issues come to them, and again, that's more of a global perspective. If we have to roll out global content, because if we roll out global content, it's going to affect our operating divisions. So we saw the need a few years ago to have an advisory council. And in that same respect, we also have, believe it or not, an NEO advisory council. okay? And so we actually go through the instructional design or instructional review process. So annually, it goes back out and says, okay, what's changed? Okay, what's changed with this content? Do we need to add new content, etc.? And so it's been very, very successful. Very, very successful getting that feedback, changing the content, etc. It's been very successful.
So, did you want to jump in, Joanna?
I would just say that I was trying to think user-generated content. We leverage that type of activity mostly through our communities of practice. So, and we do leverage technology with our communities of practice. Behind our firewall, we have what is it? It's not PowerPedia. It is PowerPedia. It's PowerPedia. So, like Wikipedia, but power, energy, you get it. Okay. So, PowerPedia is one way that we try to encourage user-generated content.
Great.
So, yeah.
Thank you.
So I would say we're not there yet, and we definitely discussed it. Priorities are placed that not as high. We want to develop more communities of practice for our mission critical occupations, and that's exactly what we're looking to do. We've even gone through checking to see whether we want to do it through our LMS or whether we want to do it using SharePoint, or whether we want to leave it up to the grassroots to develop something. And but we are looking to foster communities of practice and get that exact type of thing going. But again, priorities, as I mentioned before, personnel are limited, so this is the highest priority, and this is nice to do, and we're not to the nice to do stuff yet, unfortunately. But I think it's a great idea, and I think it's exactly where I want us to be, and hopefully we'll get there soon.
Thank you.
And I think you can get a lot of that too through if you do evaluations. We use Metric That Matters, and we get, you know, there's areas in there where you can have free content where, you know, you can put comments in. And individuals, they do comment about the content of the material, etc. Okay, and so we take that feedback back, okay, and look at the content as well.
All right. Well, I think we've run up against our end of our allotted time here this morning.
I would like to, first of all, give a shout out to Peter Shelby, who was